The houses in this town are $270,000 more expensive than they should be, 50% overvalued, but that's just one of New Zealand's 5 most overpriced areas. So today we're counting down the 5 towns where house prices are mathematically more expensive than they should be, and what's quietly driving each one, so that by the end you'll know exactly which areas are priced near the top right now and whether you live in one of them.
Now, for the last couple of years, I've been really trying to understand which areas have house prices that are really good value and potentially could take off, maybe go up in value a bit, and which areas are booming today but now look overpriced. And so what we're going to do is we are going to count them down from 5 to 1, the top 5 most overpriced areas in the country. Andrew, what comes in at number 5?
Number 5 is Central Otago District. So it's 28% overvalued. And that includes places like Cromwell, Clyde, Alexandra. And this is part of the country that Kiwis love, right? Like you'd happily move there in a heartbeat because it's wine country, there's lakes, it's relaxing, close to Queenstown, but maybe not as expensive as Queenstown. And in fact, some of my clients that I've worked with for years are retiring now and have already moved there just to kind of figure it out. But the problem is, although it's gone really, really well over the last wee while, being so highly overvalued makes me think, yeah, it might seem cheaper than Queenstown, but it's still really expensive compared to where we'd expect it to be.
And if we put that 28% overvalued into context, the average property in Central Otago costs about $915,000. So that's $199,000 overpriced by our number crunching. Now, one of the big questions people are going to ask is, well, how do you know it's 28% overvalued? And the way we do that is we look at house prices in Central Otago and we compare it to the rest of New Zealand. And we try and figure out, well, on average, how expensive is Central Otago compared to the rest of the country? And of course, sometimes different markets will go up and down in value independently of one another. So Wellington could be booming while Gisborne is flat, and Napier could be going off like a frog in a sock while Auckland's struggling or house prices are falling there. And what we see with Central Otago is there have been times when actually house prices there were cheaper than we thought that they should be compared to the rest of New Zealand, at least.
Doesn't mean they're cheap necessarily. It just means cheaper than they could be.
For that area, right? It's a bit like, I often talk about Invercargill. Invercargill has cheap house prices. The average house price there is like half of the rest of the country. But if Invercargill house prices were, say, 75% of the price of the rest of the country, you'd say, well, that's cheaper than average, but it's still expensive for Invercargill, and that's what we're trying to figure out here. So if I wound back the clock to, say, August 2001, Central Otago was like 20% undervalued. That'd be a great time to get in there. But then house prices spiked. They went up way faster than the rest of the country. Then between 2009 and down to 2015, we saw that Central Otago house prices stayed flat and the rest of the country was booming, or the average property in the country was booming. And so we saw that Central Otago started to become better value. But over the last decade or so, we've seen it go the other way. Central Otago just keeps on going up in value really, really quickly. That means people who have invested there get a lot of capital growth, but it does mean that it's looking like it's not as good value as it used to be, or we would typically expect it to be. Now, there are some limitations to this, but before we get into that, I want to come across to number 4. What is number 4 on our list, Andrew? The 4th most overpriced area in the country.
So that's the Southland District, and it's also 28% overvalued. And just a quick caveat up front, this is Southland District, the rural areas around Invercargill, so Te Anau, Winton, Riverton, Tuatapiti. And some of the other areas like Invercargill and Gore are overvalued as well, but Southland District, that bet them. It comes out on top.
Yeah, one of the issues in parts of New Zealand is you've got Southland, which is the whole region, which includes Gore and Invercargill, and then you've got Southland District, which doesn't include Gore and Invercargill. So why is it that we see Southland District is just so overvalued? Like, what's going on there?
Well, parts of that is because the property prices are booming down south, and so the average Southland property is now $582,000, so up 11% in the last 12 months. And this is a good example of where prices, again, might be cheap, like you described before, but that's compared to the rest of the country. But if you think about it in context of as location, they are quite expensive.
It's a bit like saying, a $15 Heineken might be cheaper than a $20 glass of really nice wine that Andrew would buy, but $15 is still really expensive for a Heineken, right? So that's where, one drink might be cheaper than the other, but $15 for a bottle of beer, that's still more expensive than you'd expect it to be. About $5 overpriced, you might say. Can't you believe a bottle of beer costs $10 these days?
Is that what they cost? I thought $15 would be about what you pay.
Oh, well, I mean, it depends whether it's craft beer, Andrew, but not for a Heineken. I mean, $15 is a bit expensive.
But
there.
I get your point.
Now, when it comes to Southland, as you said, their average house price about $582,000. So we see Southland District is about $128,000 overpriced right now. Now, there's a very important question, which is, does overpriced mean that Southland District is about to drop, like the average house price is going to drop $128,000? Short answer is no. So this model that we're taking you guys through, and this way of thinking about house prices, isn't saying that house prices are about to drop. Typically what happens is we would expect Southland District house prices to peter off for a bit, go flat for a while. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, maybe not until 2 or 3 years in the future, but eventually we'd expect the rest of the country, or at least the undervalued areas, to go through what we call catch-up growth, where those areas are now looking cheap, so property investors start buying there instead, stop buying quite as much in Southland District, house prices there peter out, go sideways, where everywhere else starts to catch up. That's what we're kind of talking about here, as opposed to saying, there's definitely going to be a $200,000 drop in property prices in Central Otago right now.
And it doesn't, of course, mean that their property prices there are never going to go up again either. And they might still go up in the short term. It's just that if you're thinking about buying and you're wanting as much growth as possible in the medium term, you really want to be thinking about an undervalued region, because otherwise you're showing up to the party at 10 o'clock and most of the booze has already been drunk.
So far we've been in the South Island. What comes in at number 3?
Number 3 is Kawerau District, which is 34% overvalued. Big numbers here, 34%.
Do you know where Kawerau is?
Yes, I do. It's a small town in the Bay of Plenty.
That is correct.
And it's got a population of about 7,700. So if you didn't know either where it was, then you could be forgiven for that.
That's because it's a very small town, right?
Show me where it is. I only know because I looked it up before this.
So it's just inland from Whakatane. So if we find Whakatane here, which is just down from Tauranga, Kawerau is just inland, and it's this tiny, tiny little district here. My understanding is, I think there's a mill there that provides a lot of jobs. It was a paper mill, I'm fairly certain.
Really?
I think so. Shall I Google that just to make sure?
I love that you also just throw out facts.
No, it's because I researched this stuff. Maid employer, Kawerau.
You must have done a lot of road trips around the North Island when you were a kid.
Oh, we did. We did. We spent a lot of time on the road. It's because we had to get out of Hawera. Yeah, it was a newsprint paper mill was the Norwegian forestry giant Norske Skog. Oh, but it closed in 2021. So if we think about that was like, I just made that up. I've got no idea if that's how you pronounce it. So Kawerau District, average property price, $411,000. So very cheap. But if it is 34% overvalued, it's overvalued by almost $105,000, which is a lot for a town that's actually quite cheap. And so what do you reckon is driving Kawerau to be overpriced in our analysis?
Look, if I were guessing, I'm thinking it's probably investor activity. So it's one of the highest rental yields in the Bay of Plenty at like 6.9%. So if you're a yield-focused investor and you're just going on gross yield, that could be an area where you're like, well, the prices are cheap, or it feels cheap, or it's lower than what I'm paying in Auckland, and the yields are higher than Auckland, so maybe that's a good place to buy. And so then, of course, that creates a bit of demand and pushes prices up.
And look, if you want to find out how over or undervalued your specific area that you live in or own investment properties in, it's really simple. You just go to Area Analyzer, which is a tool on the Opus Partners website. Pop in wherever you live. So I live in Auckland. We'll pull that up. And you're going to be able to see how over or undervalued that specific area is. Because the truth is, there is like 66 66 regions in New Zealand that you can potentially look at, and we're only covering the top 5 most overpriced. If I look at my hometown, well, it's not, I'll call it my hometown now, of Auckland, it's about 9.5% undervalued under this analysis. Now, what comes in at number 2, because we're down to the final 2.
Number 2 is an interesting one because there's still so much demand, and that's Queenstown Lakes District. So it's 37% overvalued. Now, probably anyone that's kind of looked at property prices there is not surprised about this. Queenstown itself and, Wanaka and Arrowtown, you've got such high prices there. I think Queenstown's average price is around $1.9 million.
Isn't that insane?
It's mental. It's about $1 million higher than the average for the rest of the country. And the structural drivers there are real. Tourism, there's a real limitation around land that's able to be developed, infrastructure push, there's international demand. And when you think, anytime you go there, you think this is the best place in the world. Who wouldn't want to live here?
Now, here's something interesting, though. You just invested in Queenstown. So you would have looked at these numbers, right? But you've just decided and made the decision, despite this number, I'm going to invest here anyway. So what drove you to invest in what we're calling an overpriced region?
Yeah, it was a hard one because I agonized over it because the numbers don't make sense, right? And what I am sure will happen is the market will level out and probably stay flat for a sustained period of time. I think it's also had quite a long stretch, like maybe 6 to 8 years of a flat period previously. Now, I bought a very entry-level property at like $850,000, which is a lot of money, but not by Queenstown standards. And the way I look at it as well, I've still got 20 years before I need to get that money back. So will it go up as quickly as the investments I'm making in Auckland? I very much doubt that. But I still wanted to have a horse in that race. And because I've got such a widespread investment portfolio, I decided, okay, I can take that risk now. If it was your first investment, I'd say it's a year off your head.
And it's quite interesting because we've got a number of clients who, we give this data to, and they've also decided to invest in Queenstown. And one shortcoming of this model, especially around Queenstown, is the way we're calculating these numbers. We are assuming that each region in New Zealand is going to go up basically at the same rate in the future. So that Kawerau is going to go up at the same rate as Queenstown. But there is an argument to say that, well, maybe Queenstown is going to keep going up in value at a faster rate than Kawerau because of all of these unique factors, particularly around tourism and international demand there. So if we say, well, let's pretend, or let's model it out as if Queenstown is going to go up faster than the rest of the country in future, then it would still be overvalued, but only by 15.4%, which is rather than 520 grand overpriced, closer to $258,000 overpriced. But I think the reason I wanted to point out that you've been investing there is that it shows that this is one number to look at, right? This is not the be all and end all, the only number. But it's a really nice number that I always like to look at. And so we're sharing it because people want to know which areas look a bit overpriced at the moment. But if we look at the number 1 most overpriced area in New Zealand, it's Mackenzie District. It's about 51% overvalued. Now, it's a very small area. Only about 5,500 people live there, but we're talking Tekapo, we're talking Twizel, we're talking Lake Pukaki and Fairlie as well. So it's kind of the South Island high country in Canterbury. And what we've seen there is that the average house price is $811,000. If you say it's about 51% overvalued, then it's overpriced by close to $272,000. It's quite a funny story, actually. I was just boarding a plane the other day, and I've obviously been sharing about Mackenzie District for a while.
You've been bagging on them for a while.
I've been bagging Twizel. A guy stops me on the plane, and he says, "You have saved me a lot of money," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, I was thinking about buying a property in Twizel. Then you said it was overpriced." And he was like, "Of course it is." So he just decided to stop buying.
Great.
So hopefully that's a good outcome for him.
I thought you were going to have someone outraged that you've been bagging on their city.
Well, what we see is that properties in Mackenzie District, they're selling about 26% above their CV. That's the highest amount in Canterbury. And that's just to show you how fast house prices have moved there. I usually ignore CV, but they can be quite a good measure of how much are house prices going up or down. And if we look, say, 12 months ago, the average property was only selling 2% above its CV. So there are quite massive swings. But what's driving that momentum in Mackenzie District?
Again, it comes down to that emotional side of things. So it's the tourism premium. If you think about Tekapo and Pukaki, they're top international destinations. And, you know, when you think about these places where you go to if you're having a holiday, you're feeling more relaxed, you're feeling more positive, and then you think, oh, this place is awesome. And it's probably at the time of year that everyone's there. And so then you get that confirmation bias, oh, this is great. And maybe also people are like downsizing. Like if you think about a wealthy Aucklander, or maybe, you know, even someone from Christchurch with an expensive house, they sell their properties and then they move over and get a second home or a holiday home or you know, retire to some of these places. And it's incredibly restricted when it comes to supply. Like Lake Tekapo, for example, it can't easily spread out because it sits on a highly protected landscape. And so because of that, you can't just go and build more and more and more.
That's really interesting. And do you know that the number one area that has gone up in value the most over like the last 20-something years is a tiny town of like 200 people called Otamatata, which is right by a lake in Mackenzie District. And it's like, well, what's driving that this tiny little town has gone up in value so much? And the only thing I can say, my best guess is that 20 years ago or 25 years ago, might have been a bit undervalued. Then it was really cheap. Now it's become more expensive. But do I think that the fact that this small 200-person town has gone up in value so much, does that mean it's going to repeat? I've got like no confidence at all that if you bought a house in Otamatata now, that it's going to outperform again over the next 25 years. But that doesn't mean that that it wasn't a good investment 25 years ago. Obviously, you've done extraordinarily well if you bought then.
And that's where, like, you make a good point before about this being just one number to look at. But it's such a good tool to kind of sense check where you're investing, because so many people, they want to invest where the market's booming. So, you know, Invercargill would be a great example right now. Like if you were in Invercargill and you'd bought a couple of properties and they'd gone up in value, you are now thinking, great, I'm going to repeat that process. But unless you've got to go back on time, you can't repeat that process. So you've got to be looking for the next opportunity. I think that's really important if you are wanting growth in that medium term. Again, sure, over the long term, property prices all tend to go up at pretty much the same rate if you've got a 20-year horizon. But it's all well and good to say, well, I've got that 20-year horizon. If you're topping up a property a couple of $100 a week and it's flat for 10 years, you feel a bit depressed and you don't repeat the process. So it's important to kind of get those early wins.
And look, this is the sort of data that our financial advisors use when they're analysing properties and recommending them to clients. And if you want to get access to that data, yep, you could use Area Analyzer. Or if you're thinking about buying a new build investment property, you can book a free chat with an Opus Partners financial advisor. I'll drop the link where you can book that free session down in the description.
So now you know the 5 most overpriced areas in New Zealand right now, but overpricing isn't the only thing that'll catch you out, because after analysing 13,000 houses in New Zealand, I found that most property websites are showing you dodgy data. That means you could buy a house that makes way less money than it potentially could. Click the video on screen and watch it now.